They do have the same goal, but sometimes they disagree on the methods to get to that end goal, and that is the case in Lewiston right now.
Sometimes by having your name there, it may cause the person to realize that, okay, you know, my life's going the way I really don't want it to go.
It needs to be addressed, and there needs to be consequences for that, and I agree with that. But what I don't agree with is identifying and labeling somebody as a prostitute.
Advocates of sex trafficking victims are disappointed that the Lewiston Police Department chose to publish the names and faces of 3 people arrested for prostitution. The information was also shared on the department's Facebook and Instagram pages.
It's challenging once that happens because it puts barriers between people wanting to receive services and wanting to get help because they're already being labeled and identified as a prostitute. And once you give that label to somebody or identify somebody as that, you know, it's hard to come back from that personally and professionally and just in the world in general.
Lieutenant St. Pierre says he is sensitive to the fact that some of the people who engage in prostitution are not doing it of their own free will.
We try to make sure we determine that they're not actually being trafficked or exploited sexually, that they're having somebody control them to do what they're doing. We bend over backwards, but we still have to recognize, and the community has to recognize, that this is still an illegal activity that's negatively impacting the community.
The majority of the time, I won't say every single time, but the majority of the time, there's a crime being committed against them, you know, behind the scenes where people aren't seeing it. So they're being arrested for this crime of prostitution when the majority of the time they're being forced to be there. They don't have a choice.
As far as publicly identifying those arrested, there are 2 very different schools of thought.
This was embarrassing for me, so I'm gonna seek some help. I'm gonna get some help with my drug addiction. I'm gonna get some help with whatever I need to, and use the services that we're readily providing them.
There's a difference between being identified as somebody who broke the law because they're driving under the influence and somebody who is arrested for prostitution. Because once you're given that label, given that name, you're looked at differently within the community. People will look at you differently. And I think that that puts a barrier on these women receiving services and being receptive to that.
Now, Tricia added that she thinks advocates should ride along with police officers when they go interact with prostitutes because people being trafficked may be more willing to open up to them than they would be willing to open up to law enforcement. Now, this is a conversation you guys started all on your own when we posted news of the latest arrest on our Facebook page. So many of you wanted to know why the names and the photos were actually made public.
Sharon says, I'd like to see the men's names and photos who are paying these women. Sick and tired of shaming the women only. Amanda takes it a step further, saying it's high time we legalize prostitution for 2 consenting adults. Timothy thinks the police aren't handling this correctly. They offer help in making positive changes while simultaneously shaming them.
But Peggy says everybody knows prostitution is a crime in our state. These people are criminals.